He warp storm raged for 7 days across the Ghoulwood sector, tearing reality like parchment in the hands of a madman. On Mortaeus Prime, beneath the towering spires of Hive Dominus, Imperial forces marshaled against a chaos incursion that had erupted from the planet's industrial heart. Smoke billowed from burning manufactorums where Daemon engines stalked through assembly lines, their metal screams echoing off rockcrete walls slick with the blood of martyred workers. In the deepest foundries, where the machine spirits had once sung hymns of production, now only warp-touched madness echoed through corridors lit by hellfire. Colonel Kastner of the 47th Cadian Shock adjusted his rebreather and surveyed the tactical display through the emerald glow of his command bunker's cogitators. 3 companies of guardsmen held the outer perimeter while Adeptus Mechanicus tech priests attempted to purge the corrupted machine spirits from the primary forges. The air tasted of ozone and burned promethium, punctuated by the distant thunder of artillery and the inhuman wailing of Daemon kind. "Sir, massive warp disturbance registering in Grid 77, reported Vox Officer Thane, his augmetic eye flickering with data streams. Energy signature unlike anything in the archives. The Storm's eye opened directly above the central manufactorum complex, reality twisted, colors bleeding into impossible spectrums as the immaterium's raw chaos pressed against the material plane. Then, through the maelstrom, something descended. A figure in black armor crashed through the manufactorum's reinforced roof, sending twisted metal and rockcrete cascading into the Daemon-infested halls below. Steam hissed from impact craters as the armored form rose slowly, mechanically, cape settling around broad shoulders like the wings of some primordial raptor. The familiar sound of mechanical breathing cut through the battlefield's cacophony, steady and implacable as a funeral dirge. Darth Vader had arrived in the 41st millennium. His respirator's rhythm never faltered as he surveyed this new battlefield. Where once he had commanded star destroyers across the galaxy's spiral arms, now he stood in a realm that felt achingly familiar yet alien. The Force flowed here but corrupted, twisted into patterns that spoke of gods mad with power and mortals driven to zealotry beyond reason. Through the torn sections of Manufactorum wall, he glimpsed a sky the color of dried blood, lit by the unnatural aurora of a warp storm's fury. A pack of bloodletters materialized from the warp-touched machinery nearby, their brass axes gleaming with unnatural heat. These creatures radiated hunger and violence in the Force, their presence like acid against his consciousness. They charged with inhuman speed across the foundry floor, clawed feet leaving molten prints in the metal grating. Vader's lightsaber ignited with its characteristic snap hiss. The crimson blade cast dancing shadows across the Daemon-racked machinery as he moved to meet them. His first strike bisected the leading bloodletter at the waist, the creature's daemonic essence shrieking as it was banished back to the warp. The second daemon leaped high, brass axe raised for a killing blow, but found only empty air as the Dark Lord sidestepped with fluid precision. His backhand strike removed its head in a spray of ichor that sizzled on the foundry floor. The remaining daemons pressed their attack with mindless fury. Vader extended his left hand, and the Force responded to his will. 3 bloodletters lifted into the air, their bodies convulsing as invisible pressure crushed windpipes that had never drawn mortal breath. He closed his fist. The daemons imploded, their forms dissolving into warp stuff that evaporated like morning mist. From the Manufactorum's upper galleries, a tech priest dominus named Ferrum 7 watched through multiple optical mechadendrites, his binary chants of analysis filling local Vox channels. The stranger's weapon defied immediate classification, though its molecular disruption field showed clear similarities to archaeotech power weapons. More intriguing was the telekinetic display. Sanctioned psychers could achieve similar effects, but this being showed no signs of warp-induced mutation or possession. His readings suggested something else entirely. Fascinating. Ferrum 7 voxed to Colonel Kastner's command frequency. This individual demonstrates psychic phenomena consistent with Imperial-sanctioned classification, yet exhibits none of the traditional markers of warp exposure. Through the Force, Vader sensed more threats approaching. A squad of Chaos Space Marines from the Iron Warriors moved through the Manufactorum's eastern approach, their power armor scarred by millennia of warfare. Their bolters tracked methodically across potential firing lanes as they advanced through the steam and smoke. These warriors radiated a different sort of corruption than the daemons, their souls eaten hollow by bitterness and spite that had curdled over 10,000 years. The lead Chaos Marine raised his bolter as he spotted the black-armored figure. Mass reactive shells erupted from the weapon's muzzle, each round designed to penetrate power armor before detonating within the target's body cavity. Vader's lightsaber moved in precise arcs, intercepting the projectiles mid-flight. Each deflected round sparked against machinery or embedded in walls, their explosive charges detonating harmlessly against reinforced surfaces. The Chaos Marines spread into a firing line, their synchronized volleys designed to overwhelm any single target's defensive capability. But Vader had faced similar tactics in countless battles across a different galaxy. He reached out through the Force, grasping one of the massive foundry cauldrons suspended from the ceiling's crane system. With a gesture, he sent the molten container crashing down onto the squad's position. Superheated metal cascaded across the Marines' power armor, seeking gaps in their protection. 2 warriors fell immediately, their vox screams cutting to static as their life signs flatlined. The survivors scattered, but Vader was already among them, his lightsaber carving through ceramite plating as easily as flesh. The final Marine managed to draw his chainsword before the crimson blade took him at the neck, his body collapsing in a rattle of desecrated armor. Above, Colonel Kastner coordinated with the tech priest through encrypted Vox channels. Whatever he is, he's eliminating our primary obstacles. I'm ordering Third Company to establish contact. Inadvisable without proper psychic screening protocols, Ferrum 7 replied, his mechadendrites twitching with concern. Unknown psychers represent significant contamination risk to standard personnel. But Vader had already sensed their approach through the Force. Imperial Guardsmen moved with disciplined precision through the Manufactorum's lower levels, their lasguns held ready but not yet aimed with killing intent. Their thoughts carried notes of fear and curiosity rather than immediate hostility. These soldiers served something they called the Emperor, a being whose presence in the Force suggested unimaginable power and authority. Lieutenant Harkin emerged from behind a cluster of plasma conduits, his stormtrooper unit maintaining covering positions. Unknown combatant, identify yourself and state your allegiance. Vader's respirator cycled twice before he responded, his voice carrying the mechanical resonance that had once struck terror into rebel hearts. I am Lord Vader. You will explain this Emperor you serve. The guardsmen exchanged glances, their training warring with instincts that screamed about confronting someone who had just carved through Chaos Marines like wheat before a scythe. Harkin activated his Vox link to command. Colonel, the Unknown is requesting information about the God Emperor, requesting guidance. Bringing him up would require inquisitorial clearance, Kastner's voice crackled through static. But we need every advantage we can get. Tell him the Emperor protects, and ask if he stands with us against the ruinous powers. Through the Force, Vader felt the sincerity in these men's belief, the way their devotion to their Emperor burned like a beacon in their souls. It reminded him of his own service to Palpatine, though these mortals' faith carried a purity his had always lacked. He sensed no deception, only desperate hope that he might prove an ally rather than another enemy. Your Emperor, he said finally, does he rule through strength, through divine will and righteous fury? Harkin replied, his voice carrying the cadence of catechism. He is the master of mankind, the light in the darkness, eternal and undying. Vader considered this. Another emperor, another galaxy, another war between light and darkness. The Force showed him glimpses of this realm's history, fragments of knowledge drawn from the minds around him. A golden throne, 10,000 years of stagnation, Primarchs scattered to the winds. An empire built on faith and fear, sustained by sacrifice on a scale that dwarfed even the old empire's ambitions. Show me to your commanders, he commanded. I would know more of this Emperor's domain. The extraction to Colonel Kastner's command post required navigating 3 kilometers of war-torn manufactorum and the approaches to Hive Dominus's lower levels. Vader moved among the Imperial forces like a dark angel of death, his presence shifting the battle's momentum wherever he appeared. When a squad of Chaos cultists attempted to overrun a guardsman position, his force lightning reduced them to charred corpses before their autoguns could find targets. When a Daemon engine burst through a wall of reinforced rockcrete, his telekinetic might crushed its mechanical components into scrap metal. Tech Priest Ferrum 7 documented each display of power with growing fascination and concern. The stranger's abilities defied standard Imperial classifications while remaining disturbingly effective. His combat protocols showed no signs of chaos taint, yet his power levels exceeded those of many sanctioned battle psychers. Most troubling was the weapon itself, which appeared to function through contained plasma contained within a magnetic field of unknown origin. At the command bunker, Colonel Kastner waited with a full honor guard and a direct Vox link to Sector Command. The man who entered his facility moved with the measured stride of absolute authority, cape flowing behind him like shadow given form. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone accustomed to commanding star fleets and planetary invasions. "Colonel Kastner," Vader acknowledged, having plucked the name from nearby thoughts. "Your Emperor, tell me of his domain." Kastner gestured to the tactical display showing Morteus Prime's continental theaters. "The God Emperor rules 1,000,000 worlds across the galaxy, my lord. For 10 millennia, his light has guided humanity against the darkness of alien Xenos, heretical cultists, and the demons of chaos. We are his sword and shield, dying gladly in his name." Through the Force, Vader examined the scope of what they described: 1,000,000 worlds, 10,000 years of continuous warfare. An empire that spanned galactic distances while maintaining unity through faith rather than fear alone. The scale dwarfed even his former master's ambitions, yet something felt wrong. This empire was stagnant, defensive, losing ground year by year to enemies that should have been crushed millennia ago. "Your Emperor," he said carefully, "does he still lead your forces?" The question brought uncomfortable silence. Colonel Kastner's thoughts carried undertones of doubt and fear that he dared not voice. Tech Priest Ferrum 7's optical sensors flickered with what might have been uncertainty in a fully human face. "The God Emperor guides us from the Golden Throne on Holy Terra," Kastner replied with rehearsed precision. "Through the Astronomicon, his will illuminates the galaxy." But Vader sensed the truth they could not speak. Their Emperor was dying, had perhaps been dying for millennia. Whatever power sustained their civilization was failing by degrees, leaving them to fight desperately against inevitable entropy. The Force showed him glimpses of a corpse god sustained by sacrifice, of an empire eating itself to maintain the illusion of strength. It was pathetically familiar. Before he could respond, proximity alarms shrieked through the bunker. Tech Priest Ferrum 7's mechadendrites interfaced with the sensor network, downloading battlefield data directly into his consciousness. Massive Daemon incursion, grid 44 through 68. Classification, Greater Daemon, likely bloodthirster manifestation. Through the bunker's reinforced viewports, they watched the sky tear open like a wound. Something vast and red and winged descended through the warp rift, its brass armor gleaming with the reflected light of burning cities. The bloodthirster's roar shattered windows across 3 hive levels as it landed in Morteus Prime's primary commercial district. Where its feet touched the ground, the rockcrete cracked and began bleeding actual blood. "All units fall back to defensive positions," Kastner ordered through the Vox network. "Prepare for orbital bombardment on my mark." Vader studied the Daemon through the Force, feeling its immense power and limitless rage. This creature was ancient beyond measure, its existence sustained by the collective violence of countless wars. It had fought space marines, imperial knights, even Titan war machines, and emerged victorious from battles that had reduced entire systems to ash. "It would not be enough. Your orbital strike will fail," he stated with mechanical certainty. Greater daemons of this magnitude require direct confrontation by champions of equivalent power. "My lord," Kastner protested, "that thing has destroyed entire companies of space marines. Even Terminators couldn't." Vader's force grip closed around the colonel's throat just enough to interrupt him. Not enough to harm, but sufficient to demonstrate the futility of argument. "I have faced gods before, Colonel. This daemon is merely another obstacle to be removed." He released the man and turned toward the bunker's exit. Behind him, he could sense the mixture of fear and desperate hope radiating from the Imperial officers. They had never encountered anyone who spoke of confronting greater daemons as if they were merely another tactical problem to be solved. The Bloodthirster had begun its rampage through Hive Dominus's commercial sectors, its whip of corn leaving trails of fire across hab blocks that housed millions of Imperial citizens. Each swing of its axe sheared through ferrocrete and steel as easily as flesh, bringing entire structures crashing down in avalanches of rubble and screaming civilians. Chaos cultists materialized from the daemon's wake, their minds blasted by proximity to their unholy master. Vader approached through the Hive's main arterial, his presence causing spontaneous Imperial Guard formations to part like water before a ship's prow. Citizens fleeing the daemon's approach stopped to stare at this dark figure moving against the flow of refugees, his cape billowing with each measured step. Some whispered prayers to the Emperor, others made the sign of the Aquila, but all sensed that something momentous was about to unfold. The Bloodthirster noticed him when they were still 2 kilometers apart. Its daemon sight pierced through smoke and flame to focus on this black-armored figure who radiated power in frequencies that set its brass teeth on edge. Here was something that did not belong to this galaxy's established patterns, a presence that spoke of different wars and alternative darknesses. "Mortal," the daemon's voice shattered windows for blocks in every direction. "You reek of unfamiliar suffering. Horn will enjoy adding your skull to his throne." Vader's lightsaber ignited in response, its crimson blade casting bloody light across the destruction around them. "You know nothing of suffering, daemon. Allow me to educate you." The Bloodthirster launched itself forward with inhuman speed, its massive wings propelling it across the distance between them in seconds. Its axe, forged from the essence of rage itself, descended toward Vader's head with force enough to split battle tanks. But the Dark Lord was no longer where the blow was aimed. He sidestepped at the last instant, his lightsaber carving a burning line across the daemon's thigh as momentum carried it past him. Daemon Ichor sizzled on the roadway where it fell, eating through rockcrete like acid. The Bloodthirster spun with impossible agility for something so massive, its whip lashing out to catch Vader around the waist. But the Force guided his movements, and the weapon wrapped around empty air as he leaped 30 meters straight up, landing on a hab block's jutting balcony. From this elevation, he could see the full scope of the daemon's rampage. Fires burned across 17 city blocks, their smoke forming spirals that seemed to reach toward the still open warp rift above. Imperial forces maintained their perimeters, but could offer no meaningful resistance to a creature of this magnitude. Even the tech priest's blessed weapons would barely scratch its daemonic hide. The Bloodthirster's wings carried it up toward his position, axe and whip ready to dismember this arrogant mortal who dared stand against Khorne's chosen champion. But as it approached, Vader reached out through the Force and grasped the building's structural supports. With a thought, he collapsed the entire hab block. Thousands of tons of ferrocrete and steel came crashing down onto the daemon's head and shoulders. Lesser creatures would have been crushed instantly, but the Bloodthirster's daemonic essence allowed it to shrug off physical damage that would destroy Imperial Titans. It emerged from the rubble with its brass armor barely scratched, though its roar carried a note of genuine fury now. Vader had used the daemon's momentary disorientation to leap to another building, this one crowned with a massive industrial ventilation system. The machinery's machine spirits had long since fled or been consumed by the warp storm's influence, leaving behind only metal and potential energy. He reached out through the Force and began to spin the enormous fan assemblies, accelerating them beyond their design tolerances. When the Bloodthirster launched itself toward his new position, Vader released his hold on the machinery. The massive fan blades tore free from their housings like projectiles fired from a Titan's cannon, each one weighing several tons and moving at supersonic speeds. The first struck the daemon's center mass, driving it back toward the ground. The second took off part of its left wing. The third embedded itself in the creature's shoulder, daemon blood spraying in arterial arcs across the devastation below. But greater daemons were not so easily destroyed. The Bloodthirster's wounds began healing almost immediately, its connection to the warp providing endless reserves of malevolent energy. It landed heavily among the ruins of the commercial district and raised its axe toward the blood-red sky. Cairhorn cares not from whence the blood flows, it bellowed, and the very air began to burn with unleashed warp energy, only that it flows eternally. The daemon's power reached out across Hive Dominus, touching every heart that beat with rage or violence. Imperial guardsmen found their discipline cracking as they turned their lasguns on fellow soldiers. Citizens began tearing at each other with bare hands, their minds consumed by artificial fury. Even tech priests felt their emotional dampeners failing as pure aggression flooded their augmetic systems. Vader felt the daemon's influence pressing against his consciousness like a tide of molten brass, but where others succumbed to mindless rage, his anger was cold, focused, refined by years of Sith training. The dark side of the Force flowed through him like liquid nitrogen, freezing his fury into a weapon more precise than any lightsaber. He dropped from the building and began walking toward the Bloodthirster across the corpse-strewn street. With each step, his power in the Force intensified. Streetlights exploded in showers of sparks. Vehicle hulks began lifting into the air around him, drawn by invisible currents of telekinetic force. The very ground cracked beneath his feet as the weight of his dark presence pressed down upon reality itself. The daemon sensed the shift in their confrontation and charged with desperate fury, its axe trailing fire as it sought to end this battle through overwhelming violence. But Vader was ready. He raised both hands, and Force lightning erupted from his fingertips in torrents of pure destruction. The electrical discharge struck the Bloodthirster full in the chest, its energy pattern unlike anything the daemon had encountered in 10 millennia of warfare. This was not the raw warp lightning of chaos sorcerers or the blessed energies of imperial psykers. This was something darker, colder, drawn from emotions that even daemons found alien and disturbing. The creature's advance staggered as Force lightning coursed through its daemonic essence. Its brass armor began to buckle and melt under the sustained electrical assault. More importantly, the energy was disrupting its connection to the warp, the source of its power and immortality. For the first time in millennia, the Bloodthirster felt something approaching genuine fear. Vader advanced through his own lightning storm, his respirator's rhythm never faltering as destruction flowed around him like a second atmosphere. When he was close enough, he dropped the Force lightning and ignited his lightsaber again. The blade found the gap where the daemon's neck met its shoulder, slicing through demonic flesh and brass armor with equal ease. The Bloodthirster's death scream shattered every window in a 5-kilometer radius as its essence dissolved back into the warp. The creature's connection to this reality had been severed not just by violence, but by a form of power it could neither understand nor effectively counter. As its form dispersed into rapidly dissipating ether, the daemon's last sensation was of being consumed by a darkness far more ancient and patient than chaos itself. Silence fell across the devastated commercial district, broken only by the steady rhythm of mechanical breathing and the distant sound of collapsing buildings. Vader stood in the crater where the daemon had made its final stand, cape settling around him like the wings of some primordial destroyer. Steam rose from his lightsaber's blade as Daemon Ichor evaporated from its surface. From hidden positions throughout the area, Imperial forces watched in stunned silence. They had just witnessed a single warrior defeat a greater daemon in direct combat, something that typically required entire companies of space marines or the intervention of Imperial saints. Yet this stranger had accomplished the feat with a combination of tactical brilliance and raw power that defied their understanding of warfare itself. Through his command bunker's surveillance network, Colonel Kastner watched the aftermath of the confrontation with growing unease. The stranger's power was undeniable, but power without proper Imperial oversight had historically led to catastrophe on a galactic scale. He activated his Vox link to Sector Command with trembling fingers. "Command, this is Kastner. We have a Code Amber Psyker situation requiring immediate inquisitorial assessment. The threat level may exceed current classification parameters." But Vader had already begun moving toward the Hive's upper levels, drawn by his growing understanding of this galaxy's power structures. Through the Force, he had sensed other minds watching the battle, minds that radiated authority and knowledge far beyond the common soldiers he had encountered. Someone with actual power was evaluating him, deciding whether he represented an opportunity or a threat to their established order. The Inquisition had taken notice of Darth Vader. In the shadowed confines of the Inquisitorial Fortress on Mortius Prime's third moon, Inquisitor Cassia Vex reviewed the battle footage with growing concern. Her Ordo Hereticus training had exposed her to every form of unsanctioned psycho manifestation, from daemon possession to chaos sorcery, but this stranger's abilities defied standard classification. His power readings exceeded those of most sanctioned battle psychers, yet showed none of the traditional markers of warp exposure or chaos corruption. "Interrogator Thorn," she commanded, her augmetic eye flickering with data analysis patterns. "Compile a full tactical assessment. Include estimated power level, threat classification, and potential uses to Imperial interests." Her subordinate's fingers danced across the cogitator interface, cross-referencing the footage against thousands of archived encounters. "Initial assessment suggests potential Alpha-class threat, my lady. Power projection capabilities exceed established parameters for uncontrolled psychers. However, his combat methodology shows clear Imperial compatibility." Vex studied the moment when the stranger had executed the Bloodthirster, watching the replay in slow motion as his weapon carved through daemonic essence. The blade's energy signature was unlike anything in Imperial archives, yet its effectiveness against chaos entities was undeniable. More intriguingly, the wielder showed no signs of corruption despite prolonged exposure to warp energies. "Prepare Interrogation Protocol 7, she ordered. "If this individual represents a potential asset, we will determine his value to the Emperor's service. If he proves corrupted." She let the implications hang unspoken, her hand resting on the blessed bolt pistol at her hip. Through the Force, Vader sensed their scrutiny even across the void between planet and moon. These watchers carried themselves with the authority of those who had broken stronger wills than his, confident in their ability to dissect any threat to their Emperor's dominion. They would come for him soon, armed with tools and techniques refined over millennia of dealing with unsanctioned psychers. Let them come. He had served one emperor already, had learned the rhythms of power and the prices demanded by absolute authority. If this new realm required him to prove his worth through trial by combat or interrogation, so be it. The galaxy had changed, but the fundamental equations of power remained constant. The strong ruled, the weak served. Everything else was merely detail. As the warp storm above Mortius Prime began to dissipate, its chaotic energies drawn back into the immaterium by forces beyond mortal comprehension, Vader made his way through Hive Dominus's middle levels. The civilians he passed reacted to his presence with mixture of awe and terror, some dropping to their knees in expressions of religious fervor, others fleeing into side passages to avoid his notice. Their reactions told him much about this galaxy's power structures. These people lived in constant fear of forces beyond their control, sustained by faith in distant authorities who promised protection in exchange for absolute obedience. It was a system he understood intimately, having helped construct something similar across the first galaxy's stars. The only difference was scale and the nature of the threats that justified such extreme measures. He found what he was looking for in the Hive's primary commercial cathedral, a massive structure that served both as a place of worship and a center of economic activity. Imperial citizens conducted their daily business beneath soaring buttresses carved with images of the Emperor's victories, while servo skulls drifted between the crowd performing maintenance and surveillance functions. At the cathedral's heart stood a statue of the God Emperor, its golden features worn smooth by countless genuflecting pilgrims. But Vader's interest focused on the smaller shrine nearby, dedicated to something the locals called the Primarchs. Here were depicted 18 figures of legendary stature, each one representing a different aspect of the Emperor's will and authority. Through the Force, he studied the statue's emotional resonances, reading the layers of worship and regret that had accumulated over centuries of veneration. These Primarchs were not merely generals or administrators. They had been sons, crafted by their Emperor as perfect instruments of conquest and governance. And they had failed him, scattered across the galaxy by civil war and bitter betrayal. The pattern was achingly familiar. Another father figure creating perfect children to serve his vision. Another family destroyed by the corrupting influence of absolute power. Another empire built on the bones of those who had trusted their Creator's wisdom. "You see it too," said a voice behind him. Vader turned to find an elderly priest approaching, his robes marked with the symbols of the Adeptus Ministorum, the tragedy of the lost sons. The priest's name was Cornelius, and his thoughts carried decades of theological study mixed with genuine anguish over the Imperium's decline. Unlike the soldiers Vader had encountered, this man's faith was tempered by knowledge of history and an understanding of the prices that absolute power demanded from those who wielded it. "Tell me of their father," Vader commanded, his respirator's rhythm echoing in the cathedral's vast space. "This Emperor you serve." Cornelius gestured toward the golden statue, its features simultaneously paternal and terrible in their divine authority. "He is the master of mankind, the eternal guide who shepherds humanity through the darkness of a hostile galaxy. For 30,000 years, he has watched over us from the golden throne, his will made manifest through his servants and champions." But the priest's surface thoughts carried deeper truths. The Emperor was dying, had been dying for 10 millennia, sustained only by the daily sacrifice of 1,000 psychers whose souls fed his flickering flame. The empire he had built was rotting from within, paralyzed by dogma and fear of change. The sons he had created to carry his vision had either fallen to chaos or disappeared into the galaxy's darkest corners. "And his sons?" Vader asked, studying the Primarch statues with growing interest. "Where are they now?" "Lost to us," Cornelius replied, his voice carrying the weight of 10,000 years of grief. "Some fell to the corruption of the ruinous powers. Others vanished into legend, pursuing quests known only to themselves. We are left with their gene sons, the Space Marines, but even they are shadows of what the Primarchs once represented." Vader considered this revelation as he studied each statue in turn. Here was Horus, the favored son whose betrayal had shattered the Emperor's dreams of conquest. There was Sanguinius, the angel whose sacrifice had bought victory at the cost of his father's humanity. And there, barely visible in the shrine's shadows, stood a figure whose features seemed familiar despite the alien craftsmanship. The statue depicted a warrior in black armor, cape flowing behind him like the wings of some predatory bird. The face was hidden behind a skull-like mask, but the posture spoke of absolute authority tempered by deep, abiding rage. Most telling was the weapon in the figure's right hand, a sword whose blade seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "That one," Vader said, pointing to the shadow-wreathed statue. "Who is he?" Cornelius followed his gaze, and his face grew troubled. "That is a figure of legend and controversy, my lord. Some say he represents the lost 11th Primarch, erased from official records for crimes too terrible to name. Others claim he is a harbinger of the Emperor's return, a dark angel who will appear when the Imperium faces its final hour." The priest's thoughts carried fragments of forbidden knowledge, scraps of heretical texts that suggested this lost Primarch had been cast out not for falling to chaos, but for embracing a different kind of darkness. A power that predated the warp, that drew strength from emotions older and colder than the Chaos God's fevered hunger. "What was his name?" Vader pressed. sensing the priest's reluctance to speak openly about such dangerous topics. "The records call him only the Dark Father," Cornelius whispered, glancing around to ensure they were not overheard. "It is said that he will return when the Emperor's light finally fails, to gather the lost and the forgotten into a new kind of family. One built not on faith, but on the acceptance of inevitable darkness." Through the Force, Vader felt the truth in those words like recognition flowering in his consciousness. This galaxy already carried legends of his arrival, myths and prophecies that had somehow anticipated his emergence from the warp storm's heart. Whether through genuine prescience or the galaxy's own need for such a figure, the Imperium had prepared a place for him in its cosmology. He was studying the statue's inscription when proximity alarms began shrieking throughout the cathedral. Imperial Guard units took up positions around the building's entrances, while servo-skulls descended from the ceiling in attack formations. Through the massive stained glass windows depicting the Emperor's victories, Vader could see inquisitorial dropships settling onto the cathedral's landing platforms. "Stay calm, my lord," Cornelius urged, though his own nervous system was flooding with adrenaline. "The Inquisition investigates all manifestations of unusual power. If you are truly pure of purpose, you have nothing to fear from their questions." Vader's lightsaber remained unignited, but his grip on its hilt tightened as he felt multiple hostile minds approaching through the cathedral's corridors. These inquisitors carried themselves with the confidence of those who had faced and defeated threats that would break lesser minds. Their weapons were blessed by rituals older than most civilizations. Their armor warded against both physical and psychic assault. They would discover that such preparations meant nothing against the dark side of the Force. Inquisitor Vex entered the cathedral with a full retinue of stormtroopers and acolytes, her power armor's machine spirit humming with barely contained aggression. Her augmetic eye fixed on Vader immediately, scanning for signs of mutation, corruption, or demonic taint. The readings confused her. This individual showed no markers of warp exposure despite wielding power that exceeded most sanctioned psychers. More disturbing was the way her psychic wards seemed to slide off his presence like water from polished ceramite. "Unknown psyker," she announced, her voice carrying the authority of Holy Terror itself. "You will submit to interrogation and psychic examination in the name of the God Emperor. Resistance will be met with immediate termination." Vader turned slowly to face her, cape settling around his armored form like a shroud. When he spoke, his mechanical voice carried undertones that set her stormtroopers' nerves on edge, a resonance that spoke of power held carefully in check. "I am Lord Vader. I do not submit to interrogation." Vex's hand moved toward her bolt pistol, but stopped as she felt invisible pressure beginning to constrict around her throat. Her stormtroopers raised their hell guns, but their targeting systems registered no lock on the stranger despite his obvious proximity. It was as if the man existed in the spaces between their sensors' ability to perceive and process information. "You will stand down," Vader continued, the Force grip tightening just enough to emphasize his point. "Your Emperor has need of servants who understand power, not inquisitors who fear it." Through her choking throat, Vex managed to gasp out activation codes for her retinue's combat protocols. Stormtroopers opened fire with hellgun volleys designed to penetrate power armor, while her acolytes began chanting litanies of banishment and purification. But their weapons found only empty air as Vader moved with inhuman speed between the cathedral's massive pillars. His lightsaber ignited mid-leap, its crimson blade carving through a stormtrooper's hellgun before removing the man's head in a single fluid motion. He landed behind another soldier and drove the weapon through his carapace armor, the superheated plasma burning through ceramite and flesh with equal ease. Before the remaining troopers could react, he had their weapons floating in mid-air, torn from their hands by telekinetic force and crushed into useless scrap metal. The acolytes' chanting grew more desperate as their blessed wards failed to contain or redirect the stranger's power. Their psychic defenses, honed against chaos, corruption, and daemon incursion, proved inadequate against energies that operated by entirely different principles. One young acolyte collapsed as Vader's presence pressed against his consciousness, blood streaming from his nose as his mind rejected contact with such alien darkness. Inquisitor Vex drew her consecrated blade, its power field crackling with energies blessed by the Emperor himself. But even as she raised the weapon, she felt the futility of the gesture. This stranger's power operated on a level that made mockery of standard inquisitorial protocols. His abilities suggested Psyker classification Alpha or higher, yet he showed none of the traditional markers that would justify such a rating. "What are you?" she gasped through the constriction around her throat. Vader released his force grip, allowing her to collapse to the cathedral floor, gasping for breath. His respirator cycled twice as he studied the surviving inquisitorial forces with something approaching clinical interest. These people were competent within their limitations, but those limitations were severe when confronted with power that operated outside their established parameters. "I am what your Emperor needs," he replied, deactivating his lightsaber. "A servant who understands that order requires strength, and strength requires the will to impose it upon chaos." Through the cathedral's Vox speakers, Colonel Kastner's voice crackled with urgent information. "All units, massive warp disturbance detected in high orbit. Chaos fleet emerging from the storm's wake. Estimated strength 12 vessels, including battlecruiser-class signatures." The timing was no coincidence. The Daemon's death had disrupted local warp currents, creating a navigational beacon that Chaos forces could follow even through the storm's chaotic energies. Now enemy ships materialized in Morteus Prime's outer system, their hulls twisted by millennia of exposure to the Immaterium's corruption. The real battle was about to begin. Vader felt the shift in the Force as thousands of corrupted souls drew closer to the planet's surface. These were not mindless cultists or lesser daemons, but organized military forces led by Chaos Space Marines who had fought for 10,000 years. Their commander radiated power and malevolent intelligence that marked him as one of the original traitors, a veteran of the Horus heresy who had watched the Imperium's dreams burn in the fires of civil war. "Inquisitor," he said, helping Vex to her feet with surprising gentleness, "your skills will be needed for what comes next. But you will follow my lead, or you will die uselessly while your Emperor's enemies claim this world." Vex's augmetic eye flickered with conflicting data streams as she processed his words. Every protocol demanded that she arrest this unsanctioned psyker and subject him to immediate interrogation. But the tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly, and his power had already proven decisive against threats that would have required extensive Imperial resources to contain. "The Emperor protects," she whispered, making the sign of the Aquila. Then, more loudly, "What are your orders?" The question surprised everyone present, including Vader himself. He had expected continued resistance, demands for compliance with Imperial authority, threats of excommunication or worse. Instead, this Inquisitor was offering to place herself under his command based on nothing more than demonstrated competence and the tactical necessities of their situation. It was refreshingly practical. "Rally your remaining forces," he commanded, moving toward the cathedral's main entrance. "Coordinate with the local guard regiments and prepare defensive positions in the upper hive levels. The enemy will attempt orbital insertion directly into the city's heart." As if summoned by his words, the sky above Morteus Prime began bleeding fire. Chaos drop pods and boarding torpedoes pierced the atmosphere like falling stars, their heat signatures painting crimson trails across the blood-red clouds. Imperial void shields flickered and died as the enemy fleet's bombardment cannon found their range, reducing entire city blocks to rubble in preparation for ground assault. The first wave of Chaos Space Marines made planetfall in the governmental district, their ceramite boots crushing Imperial symbols underfoot as they emerged from smoking crater pods. These were warriors of the Iron Warriors Legion, their armor scarred by 10 millennia of siege warfare and marked with the brass symbols of their dark patrons. They moved with mechanical precision through the ruined streets, establishing firing positions and deploying heavy weapons with the expertise of those who had perfected the art of urban warfare. Leading them was Warsmith Draknor, a hulking figure whose power armor had been fused with daemon-touched machinery during the Long War's early centuries. His autocannon arm whined as it cycled through target acquisition protocols, while his remaining human eye burned with the cold fury of someone who had watched the Imperium's hypocrisy for 10,000 years. He had come to Mortius Prime following the psychic disturbance that marked the stranger's arrival, drawn by curiosity about what new weapon the Corpse Emperor's servants had unleashed. Through the Force, Vader felt the Warsmith's approach like acid against his consciousness. This was a mind that had been twisted by centuries of exposure to chaos energies, yet retained enough of its original intelligence to pose a genuine threat. More dangerous were the tactical capabilities at his command. Veteran space marines supported by Daemon engines and corrupted tech marines whose knowledge of Imperial systems made them devastating saboteurs. The cathedral's reinforced gates exploded inward as a squad of Havocs unleashed concentrated missile fire against the structure's foundations. Smoke and debris filled the air as Chaos Space Marines poured through the breach, their bolt pistols spitting mass reactive death at anything that moved. But they found only empty pews and abandoned prayer stations. Their intended targets had already moved to more defensible positions. From the cathedral's bell tower, Vader observed the enemy deployment through electrobinoculars provided by Colonel Kastner's technical staff. The Chaos Forces were establishing a perimeter around the governmental district, while their heavy support teams set up firing lanes covering all major approaches. Standard Imperial counterattack doctrine would require coordinated assault by multiple Guard regiments, supported by orbital bombardment, assuming the Navy could break through the enemy fleet's screening formations. It would take too long, cost too many lives, and likely fail against an enemy this experienced. Inquisitor Vex, he voxed through the comlink she had provided, order all Imperial forces to maintain defensive positions. Do not attempt to engage the enemy directly. My lord, her voice crackled back through static, our doctrine requires immediate counterattack to prevent enemy consolidation. If we allow them to establish, your doctrine is inadequate against opponents of this caliber, Vader interrupted, his mechanical voice cutting through her protest. These are not cultists or renegades. They are veteran warriors who have fought longer than your Imperium has existed. Conventional tactics will only feed them more corpses. Instead of argument, he received acknowledgement. Whatever else could be said about Inquisitor Vex, she was capable of recognizing superior tactical judgment when it was demonstrated. Her forces would maintain their positions and wait for his signal to advance. Vader deactivated the Vox link and began his descent towards street level. The Force showed him the patterns of the enemy deployment, the gaps in their coverage where a single infiltrator could penetrate their lines and strike at command elements. These Iron Warriors were skilled, but they had grown accustomed to fighting enemies who telegraphed their intentions through massed formations and overwhelming firepower. They were unprepared for a lone operative who could move unseen through their sensor networks and strike without warning. The first Chaos Space Marine died without knowing he was under attack. Vader's lightsaber took him through the neck from behind, the crimson blade emerging from his gorget in a spray of superheated blood. The second Marine turned toward the sound, but found only shadows and the fading echo of mechanical breathing. His Vox call for backup died with him as invisible force crushed his throat. Working through the governmental district's maintenance tunnels and service corridors, Vader eliminated isolated sentries and communication specialists with surgical precision. Each kill was silent, efficient, designed to sow confusion without alerting the main force to his presence. By the time Warsmith Draknor realized his perimeter was being compromised, half his support elements had already been eliminated. Impossible, the Warsmith growled into his Vox pickup as status reports streamed across his helmet display. No single operative could penetrate Iron Warrior security protocols. But the evidence was undeniable. His force was being systematically dismantled by someone who moved through their positions like a ghost made of shadow and death. Worse, his chaos-touched sensors detected no warp signatures, no psychic emanations that would explain how the enemy was bypassing their detection systems. It was as if their attacker existed in the spaces between reality, striking from angles that shouldn't exist. Draknor ordered his remaining forces to consolidate around the district's primary command center, a reinforced bunker that had once housed the planetary governor's emergency staff. If this invisible enemy wanted to face them directly, he would have to assault a position that could withstand sustained bombardment from Imperial Titans. The Warsmith's enhanced sensors swept constantly across all approaches, while his Havocs maintained overlapping fields of fire. It would not be enough. Vader approached the bunker through the ruins of an adjacent hab block, moving through the rubble with liquid grace despite his armor's apparent bulk. The Force guided his steps around sensor sweeps and targeting arrays, while his growing understanding of this galaxy's technology allowed him to anticipate the Defender's capabilities. These Chaos Marines relied heavily on their equipment's superiority over standard Imperial gear, but their overdependence on technology created exploitable vulnerabilities. He reached out through the Force and began interfering with the bunker's power distribution systems. Circuit breakers failed in cascade sequences that left entire sections without lighting or environmental control. Vox networks crashed as their signal processors overloaded beyond design tolerances. Most critically, the facility's void shields began fluctuating as their generators struggled with power inputs that defied their programming parameters. "What is happening?" Draknor demanded as his command center's systems failed around him. "Report." His tech marines worked frantically to restore functionality, but their corrupted knowledge was inadequate against an enemy who understood technology from first principles rather than through ritual and tradition. Each system they restored immediately failed again, leaving them essentially blind and deaf within their supposedly impregnable fortress. That was when Vader made his entrance. The bunker's reinforced blast doors, rated to withstand direct hits from battle cannon, simply exploded inward as if struck by invisible titans. Smoke and debris filled the command center as a figure in black armor strode through the destruction, cape flowing behind him like the wings of some primordial angel of death. His lightsaber cast dancing shadows across walls lined with tactical displays and communication equipment. Warsmith Draknor's autocannon arm swiveled toward this new threat, but the weapon's targeting systems refused to lock onto the intruder. His shots went wild as Vader moved with inhuman speed between cover positions, advancing steadily toward the command center's heart. Other Marines opened fire with bolt pistols and chainswords, but their attacks met only empty air or ricocheted harmlessly off invisible barriers. "What are you?" Draknor roared, abandoning his ruined weapon systems in favor of a blessed chainsword that screamed with daemon-touched hunger. Vader's lightsaber met the chainsword in a shower of sparks that illuminated the command center like stroboscopic lightning. For a moment, the two weapons were locked together, ancient technologies straining against each other in a test of fundamental principles. Then the lightsaber's focused plasma field began cutting through the chainsword's adamantine teeth, reducing the blessed weapon to smoking metal fragments. The Warsmith's follow-up punch would have shattered normal power armor, but Vader caught his fist in a force grip that held it motionless despite the servo motor's straining efforts. For the first time in 10 millennia, Draknor felt something approaching genuine fear as he stared into the stranger's mask and sensed the vast darkness that lay beneath its surface. "I am inevitable," Vader replied, and drove his lightsaber through the Warsmith's chest cavity. The command center fell silent except for the steady rhythm of mechanical breathing and the crackling of damaged electronics. Outside, the remaining Iron Warriors waited for orders that would never come, their command structure decapitated by an enemy they had never truly seen. Within minutes, they would be retreating toward their extraction points, their mission abandoned in the face of losses they could not explain or counter. Through the Force, Vader sensed Inquisitor Vex's approach with a full company of stormtroopers. The woman had shown admirable tactical judgment by allowing him to operate independently, then moving to capitalize on his success once the enemy leadership was eliminated. Her forces would mop up the surviving Chaos Marines, while he turned his attention to larger strategic concerns. The enemy fleet still commanded orbital space, and their ground forces included elements beyond simple Space Marine deployment. Through the Force, he could feel other powers stirring in response to the night's events. Daemon princes drawn by the scent of spectacular violence, rogue psykers whose abilities rivaled his own, perhaps even one of the Chaos Primarchs themselves taking notice of this new variable in the great game. The real test was yet to come. In the upper atmosphere, aboard the Chaos battlecruiser Eternal Malice, Lord Commander Vorthak studied tactical displays with growing interest rather than concern. The loss of Draknor's ground forces was regrettable but not unexpected. The Iron Warriors had always been too rigid in their approach to deal with truly unconventional opponents. More intriguing was the nature of their opponent, whose power signature defied classification by any known Imperial or Chaos taxonomy. Vorthak himself was a veteran of the Long War who had fought at Terra during the siege, had watched the Emperor's palace burn while Horus traded blows with his former father. 10,000 years of warfare had taught him to recognize genuine threats versus mere propaganda phantoms. This stranger represented something entirely new, a variable that could shift the balance of power between Chaos and Imperium if properly understood and either recruited or eliminated. "Prepare my personal strike force," he commanded his bridge crew. "I will meet this stranger myself and determine his true nature." The teleportarium's energies began building as Vorthak donned his Terminator armor, each piece blessed by Daemon princes and marked with the skulls of Imperial champions who had fallen to his power. His force weapon hummed with barely contained warp energy, while his storm bolter's machine spirit whispered promises of death to the Emperor's servants. If this stranger truly possessed power worthy of Chaos attention, he would either kneel before the Dark Gods or join the countless souls they had already claimed. On Mortius Prime's surface, Vader felt the massive psychic disturbance as enemy forces prepared to teleport directly into the Hive City's heart. Unlike the ground assault, this would be a surgical strike by elite forces capable of appearing anywhere within the planet's defensive perimeter. Their commander radiated power and malevolent intelligence that marked him as a true veteran of the Long War, someone who had witnessed the Imperium's birth and dedicated 10 millennia to its destruction. Colonel Kastner, he voxed through the Imperial Command Network, enemy teleportation assault imminent. Evacuate all non-essential personnel from the upper Hive levels and prepare your heaviest weapons for close quarters combat. Understood, my lord. Where do you want us to concentrate our forces? Vader studied the tactical situation through the Force, feeling the currents of probability and possibility that surrounded the coming confrontation. The enemy commander would materialize somewhere with symbolic significance, a location that would demonstrate Chaos superiority over Imperial authority. There was only one site in Hive Dominus that met those criteria. "The Cathedral," he replied. "They will attempt to desecrate the most sacred site within their reach. Position your forces in defensive rings around the building, but do not enter the structure itself." "My lord, if they take the Cathedral, they will not," Vader stated with mechanical certainty. "I will be waiting for them." The teleportation began as Morteos Prime's sun reached its zenith, painting the blood-red sky in shades of brass and fire. Reality twisted in the cathedral's nave as warp energies tore through the barrier between dimensions, bringing forth enemies who had refined their hatred over 10,000 years of continuous warfare. Terminator armor materialized from the Immaterium's depths, each suit bearing the marks of countless battles and the blessings of dark powers that had watched civilizations rise and fall. Lord Commander Vorthak stepped from the teleportation circle with his Stormbolter already scanning for targets. His tactical display showed the cathedral apparently empty except for scattered debris from the earlier fighting, but his enhanced senses detected something else. A presence that radiated power and darkness in frequencies that set his daemon-touched augmetics on edge. "Show yourself," he commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded star fleets and raised solar systems. "Face me with honor if you possess such a concept." Vader emerged from the shadows behind the Emperor's statue, his cape settling around his armored form like the wings of some vengeful spirit. When he spoke, his mechanical voice echoed through the cathedral's vast space with the weight of absolute conviction. "Honor is for those who have the luxury of weakness, ideal only in necessity." The two champions regarded each other across the cathedral's nave, their respective powers pressing against reality like opposing storms. Vorthak's connection to the warp painted fractal patterns across his perception, showing him probability threads where this stranger's death fed power to the dark gods. But beneath those visions lay something else. A darkness that predated chaos itself and operated by rules that even daemon princes found alien. "What are you?" the Chaos Lord asked, echoing the question that had followed Vader since his arrival in this galaxy. "I am what this galaxy has been waiting for," Vader replied, igniting his lightsaber. The end of its stagnation. Battle erupted across the cathedral's sacred ground as two masters of warfare tested their strength against each other. Vorthak's Stormbolter spat mass-reactive shells that exploded against invisible barriers, their detonations illuminating stained glass windows depicting the Emperor's victories. His force weapon crackled with warp energies as he charged forward, Terminator armor's servo motors straining to match his opponent's inhuman speed. But Vader had fought similar opponents before, warriors whose power, armor, and enhanced weapons made them nearly invulnerable to conventional attacks. His lightsaber carved through Terminator plating as easily as flesh, while his mastery of the Force allowed him to anticipate and counter attacks before they fully developed. More importantly, his dark side abilities operated on principles that chaos powers could not fully comprehend or effectively resist. The duel raged between the cathedral's massive pillars, each exchange of blows sending shockwaves through the ancient stone. Vorthak's experience showed in his tactical flexibility, using the environment to his advantage, while his Terminator armor's systems provided targeting data and threat analysis. But his opponent moved with fluid grace that made mockery of such calculations, striking from angles that shouldn't exist and defending positions through methods that defied tactical doctrine. Force lightning erupted from Vader's fingertips, coursing through Vorthak's Terminator armor and overloading its spiritual wards. The Chaos Lord's counterattack with his force weapon met an invisible barrier that turned the blessed blade aside, leaving him open for a lightsaber strike that carved through his shoulder pauldron. Daemon-touched ceramite fell smoking to the cathedral floor as Vorthak stumbled backward, his enhanced physiology already working to seal the wound. "Impossible," he gasped, studying the damage to armor that had turned aside Titan weapons. "What manner of blade can penetrate blessed Terminator plate?" Instead of answering, Vader pressed his attack with renewed intensity. His lightsaber became a crimson blur as he carved through the Chaos Lord's defenses, each strike precisely targeted at gaps in armor coverage or vulnerable system junctions. Vorthak's Stormbolter was severed at the wrist, its ammunition feeding system sparking as blessed rounds scattered across the floor. His force weapon followed moments later, its daemon-touched edge no match for focused plasma sustained by the Force itself. The end came suddenly, inevitably. Vorthak's final desperate charge brought him within reach of his opponent's blade, but also left him exposed to a force grip that seized his throat and lifted him into the air. For a moment, the ancient warrior hung suspended above the cathedral floor, his Terminator armor's weight meaningless against the power that held him. "Your Chaos Gods offer only stagnation disguised as change," Vader stated, his mechanical voice cutting through the Chaos Lord's strangled breathing. "I offer something far more valuable: purpose." The lightsaber's thrust pierced Vorthak's chest cavity, its energy disrupting not just his physical form but the warp-touched enhancements that had sustained him for 10 millennia. As the ancient warrior's life faded, his last sensation was of being consumed by a darkness that made even the Eye of Terror seem bright by comparison. Silence returned to the cathedral as Vader deactivated his lightsaber and surveyed the aftermath of their confrontation. Around him lay the remains of Terminator armor that had survived the Siege of Terror itself, reduced to smoking scrap by weapons and techniques that operated outside this galaxy's established parameters. The victory sent shockwaves through both Imperial and Chaos forces, announcing the arrival of a new power that answered to neither the Corpse Emperor nor the Dark Gods. Through the Force, he felt the enemy fleet's reaction to their commander's death, confusion, fear, and the beginnings of a general withdrawal as lesser champions fought for control of the expedition's remnants. Without unified leadership, the Chaos forces would retreat into the warp's depths, rather than risk further losses to an enemy they could not understand or effectively combat. But larger powers were taking notice. Through the Immaterium's chaotic currents, ancient intelligences turned their attention toward Morteus Prime and the anomaly that had disrupted their carefully maintained game of cosmic chess. Some saw opportunity in this new variable, others perceived only threat, but all recognized that the galaxy's fundamental equations had shifted in ways that demanded response. In the cathedral's aftermath, Inquisitor Vex approached with careful reverence, her augmetic eye recording everything for later analysis by higher authorities. The stranger's power was beyond question now, but his ultimate loyalties remained unclear. He had served Imperial interests by eliminating Chaos threats, yet his methods and abilities suggested origins that transcended standard classifications. "My lord," she said formally, making the sign of the Aquila, "the enemy fleet is withdrawing. Morteus Prime is secure." Vader nodded acknowledgement, but his attention was already turning toward larger strategic concerns. Through the Force, he could sense the vast scope of this galaxy's conflicts. 1,000,000 worlds locked in eternal warfare, ancient grudges that had festered for 10 millennia, powers beyond mortal comprehension playing games with civilizations as their pieces. The Imperium's stagnation was just one symptom of a deeper malaise that had infected the galaxy's fundamental nature. "Inquisitor," he said finally, "arrange transportation to your sector command. It is time I met with those who truly hold power in this Imperium." "My lord, that would require clearance from—" "It would require nothing more than recognition of necessity," Vader interrupted, his Force presence pressing against her consciousness like a tide of liquid darkness. "Your superiors will want to meet me, whether they admit it or not. The question is whether they approach me as supplicants seeking an ally or as enemies requiring elimination." Vex's augmetic eye flickered with uncertainty as she processed the implications of his words. This stranger had single-handedly defeated threats that typically required extensive Imperial resources to contain, but his ultimate goals remained opaque. If he truly intended to present himself to Sector Command, the resulting political upheaval could destabilize the entire region's power structure. "I will make the arrangements," she agreed, recognizing the futility of further argument. "But my lord, the higher authorities will demand answers. They will want to know what you are, where you came from, and what you intend for the Imperium's future." Vader's respirator cycled twice as he considered her warning. In truth, he was still discovering the answers to those questions himself. This galaxy had shown him possibilities that transcended his original ambitions. Not merely another empire built on fear and strength, but a realm where power and purpose could be wedded in ways that his former master had never imagined. The Imperium's stagnation was not inevitable. It was simply the result of leadership that had forgotten how to adapt and evolve. "Tell them," he said finally, moving toward the cathedral's main entrance, "that Lord Vader has come to restore order to a galaxy that has forgotten the meaning of strength. Tell them that their Emperor's vision was incomplete and that I have come to provide what was missing." As he walked through the cathedral's massive doors, leaving behind the smoking remains of enemies who had underestimated his power, Vader felt the galaxy's attention focusing on him like a lens concentrating starlight. Ancient powers stirred in their hidden strongholds, sensing the emergence of something that could tip the balance between order and chaos in directions none of them had anticipated. The Imperium would need to decide whether he represented salvation or damnation, but in the end, their decision would matter less than his own determination to forge a new order from the ashes of the old. The galaxy had shown him its weakness. Now he would show its strength, refined by patience, tempered by experience, and guided by a vision that transcended the petty divisions between light and darkness. The stars themselves would kneel before the power of the dark side, or they would burn in the fires of inevitable change. In the depths of the warp, entities older than civilizations felt the disturbance and began to stir. A new player had entered the great game, one whose power operated by rules they did not fully understand. Some sought to corrupt him, others to destroy him, but all recognized that the galaxy's fate had shifted onto new trajectories that could reshape the very nature of existence itself. The age of stagnation was ending. What would rise from its ashes remained to be seen.